Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Shah Weekly. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the Flutter framework, which is a cross-platform framework from Google to create apps for iOS devices as well as Android devices using the same exact code base. Now, the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you have installed Flutter. So if you go to the Getting Started, choose your platform. I'm on Mac OS. I'm just going to select Mac OS. And make sure that you download the zip file. And what you have to do is to create a folder called development or any other folder and then unzip this particular file. And you should be good to go. All right. So make sure that you follow these instructions so that you have at least installed Flutter. And after you have installed Flutter, we can go ahead and create our first Flutter application. So now I'm on the terminal and I want to create my first Flutter application. I'm just going to go ahead and jump onto the desktop and run Flutter create and then the name of the project that I want to create. I'm just going to call it Hello Flutter. And you can see it runs pretty quickly and it creates a folder called hello_flutter, and that will be my folder for Flutter. I can go ahead and jump into that particular folder. Once I'm inside that folder, I can simply say code . I have Visual Studio Code installed, so it will simply open it up. There we go. Now, when you're working with Flutter, one extension that you definitely should install will be the Flutter extension. So I'll go to extensions over here. And if you go ahead and search for Flutter, that's the one that we need, the topmost one, where you can see there's 1.9 million downloads. So that's the one that you need. And using the Flutter extension, you can also create Flutter apps. You can do a lot of stuff using Flutter extension. So this, make sure, please, that you have the Flutter extension installed. All right. Okay. So after installing this, let's go ahead and take a look at our app. This is the structure of the app. You have the iOS folder with iOS specific code, Android folder for Android specific code. This is the kind of like the generated code. I mean, you can change it, but the one that we'll be working with will be the lib folder. And you can see that it only has one file called main. My font size is kind of pretty big, so let's go ahead and fix that first. And 24, no, 24 is too big. Let's go ahead and with 14. Okay, that's perfect. So you can see that by default, Flutter writes a lot of code for you for kind of like a startup app. Now the question is, well, how do you run this app? So if you want to run it on an iOS, make sure that you have Xcode installed and you have iOS simulators installed. If you want to run it on Android, then obviously you have to make sure that you have Android simulators installed. So for Android simulators, I usually just download Android Studio, and for iOS, I simply download Xcode. So I've already downloaded both of those and I've installed both of those on my machine. Let me go to Run, and I can go ahead and say Start Debugging. Now, since I do have an option and I have multiple simulators installed, I can actually say that which simulator I want to run this on. So I'm just going to go ahead and say Pixel 3. And there we go. It's going to launch Pixel 3 and run this application, which, by the way, I have not written or changed any single line of code. This application was created when I ran Flutter create and the name of the project. So this is a counter application, completely created, and it works by default. So this is kind of like a dummy code added for the start of your project. And this is what the application looks like. Flutter demo homepage. You have pushed the button this many times, it says 0. If I go ahead and push the button, it's a simple counter app, so it will increment the counter. Okay, so how do we create this app using our code? I mean, using all of this, writing it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the very beginning. I'm going to go ahead and remove everything. So now we have nothing. All right. The first thing we need to do is we need to import some packages. And the first package that I'm going to import will be package. And it will be a Flutter package. So I'm just going to go ahead and say Flutter. And it's going to be called material.dart. The material.dart package is one of those packages that allows you the material look and feel. Now, if you pay close attention over here, if I'm adding the packages, you'll see that another package I have is a Cupertino package. Cupertino package basically means that this package will contain the look and feel for iOS specific devices, like the iOS navigation bar, iOS button. You might be thinking that, okay, so you have to write the code 2 times to create for Flutter. When you're writing Flutter apps, you're not really thinking about that I'm targeting for iOS and I'm targeting for Android. You're just building the app. So it's not going to be, oh, it looks like an Android app or it looks like a iOS app. You can definitely do that by targeting specific platforms. But when you're writing Flutter app, you simply just create an app. All right. So we're going to use the material.dart, which means it's going to have a flat kind of a look and feel. The next thing that we want to do is we want to implement the main function. This is the kind of like the main function that gets fired, the first function. And I'm going to go ahead and call a function called runapp and pass in the name or the first screen or the widget that I want to create. So let me go ahead and a little bit talk about the widget. I'm just going to call it counter app over here. Okay, so everything in Flutter is a widget. A widget can be something that can be displayed on the screen. Sometimes the widget can have some sort of a user interface, but sometimes the widgets cannot have any user interface. Like we will use a column widget and a center widget and all of those kind of widgets. They don't really have any look and feel, but they are used for formatting or laying out elements on the screen. But everything in Flutter is a widget. And when you combine a lot of widgets together, you get an app. All right, so now it's complaining that there is no such thing as counter app, so we'll have to go ahead and create the counter app. If you're wondering what kind of a language that I'm typing this in, this is called the Dart language, D-A-R-T. It's kind of like its own language, I would say, right? It doesn't really look like Swift and it doesn't really look like a JavaScript, so it's kind of like own language. And it's pretty easy to navigate this language. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and create a widget. I'm just going to call it stateless widget. We are going to come back to what exactly is a stateless widget. Now, when you're extending any kind of a widget in Flutter, the one function that you must implement is the build function. The build function is basically how the widget is going to look like. And that is required if you're using any kind of a widget. So this is where we will write or say that, well, what our widget kind of looks like. And for now, I'm just going to go ahead and return a material app. We're building a material app, kind of like a flat design, flat layout. And in the material app, I'm just going to go ahead and pass in the title. I'm just going to call it Flutter app. And we will have home. This is kind of like your home screen. What do you want to see on your home screen? So over here, I'm going to use something called a scaffold. So what exactly is a scaffold? A scaffold is kind of like the skeleton structure. It will give you option to set the app bar, meaning the top navigation bar. It's going to give you option to set the body, the main content. So it gives you a little bit more structure. So you can see now we can actually set the app bar, which is a top bar. And I can set it to something, a widget called app bar. All of these are actually widgets. And I will go ahead and set the title for the app bar to be another widget, which is the text widget. And I will say, hello Flutter. All right, so let's go ahead and run our application, whatever we have right now. So I'm going to say run, start debugging. And since our Android Pixel 3 emulator is open, that's going to be the default, and that's the one that's going to be running. And if we run the application as it is right now, it shows us like this. So we have a navigation bar at the top, which says Hello Flutter. So it's pretty cool that with few lines of code, we were able to get that. Now the next thing that we want to do is to set up the actual body, meaning we should display some sort of a counter over here, and we should display a button which allows us to increment the counter. So we need some sort of a text, and we need some sort of a button. So we need two controls. So inside the scaffold, we have the body property, and body property, you can assign it to any widget, and one of those widgets is called the column widget. Now a column widget is a little bit of a different widget because it doesn't really have any kind of a display of its own, but you can add other widgets to it. And any other widget that you're going to add to the column, it's going to flow vertically. So this means that a column widget, you can think of it that it's kind of like this. And if you add a widget, the first widget is going to go here, then the second widget is going to go here, third is there, and then so much more. All right? It's kind of like a flex box flowing in a column-wise fashion if you have done any web development. Okay, so inside over here, I'm just going to go ahead and say counter value. And the second one, separated by a comma, will be the actual button. But we have many different choices of creating a button, so I'm just going to use something called a flat button. But you can use a floating button or something else. On press, when we press a button, what should we do? I'm just going to say nothing. So we are firing a function and there's nothing in the body of the function. And the child of the button means that what will the button display? And I'm just going to say increment. Okay, let's go ahead and save it. And you can see that when we started running our application, I actually said start debugging. So as soon as I go ahead and save, it is refreshing and showing me the updated value. So if I go ahead and say something over here and save, boom, it actually changed. Pretty cool, right? This is called hot reload, meaning every time I save, it automatically refreshes in the emulator. And this is very, very beneficial because it makes your basically creating the UI much more faster. So you can iterate through different user interfaces very, very fast. Now, one of the things that I want to do is I want to make the actual text a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to go ahead and use style property and set the text style, which is another widget. And I'm just going to go ahead and say font size, and just going to say 30. Okay, that's pretty big. That's pretty good. For the flat button, since we are inside the flat button right here, I am going to add a property, and we will call it color. This is the background color, and I'm going to use a colors.green. And it's green, pretty cool. But the text color should be something else. So I'm just going to say colors.white, and now it's white. So everything looks fine, but I actually want this to be a little bit more centered. So how do I do that? Now there are multiple ways of doing that. I can go ahead and right click on this column and I can say refactor, and I can wrap everything with the center widget. Let's go ahead and save it. Okay, so it's centered, but it's centered kind of like horizontally, not vertically. So for vertical center, I can go ahead and say max main axis alignment. Main axis for the column is, well, a column-wise, like a vertical alignment. And I can say main axis alignment dot center. And there we go. Now it's in the center. Pretty cool, right? But it's just widgets. Widgets inside widgets inside widgets. It's more widgets and widgets. Everything is a widget. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to do actual increment part. So when we click on the button, we increment the value, and that value shows up instead of the counter value text. Unfortunately, we cannot do it like this. And the reason is that we chose something called a stateless widget. This means that this widget is not going to take care of the state. What is a state? Well, state is, you can think of the state kind of like the data, well, the state in this case will be the value of the counter, in other words. But what we want to do is we want to update the value of the counter, like 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. But we also want to keep our user interface sync with the value. But since we are saying that this is a stateless widget, we can't really do that. Okay? So how do we do this then? And this is done in a little bit of a different way, as if you compare it to SwiftUI or some other frameworks. What we will end up doing is that we will end up creating a separate class, and we will say counter app state. So this particular class will be the one responsible for managing the state. It's going to be extending our state of the counter app. So basically what we're doing is that this particular class is going to be managing the state, and this class counter app is just going to forward everything to the counter app state class, that if you have anything for the state, this class is going to do that. And we are going to change this to a stateful widget. So this will be a stateful widget, but the state will be maintained by this class. Now you might be wondering, wait a minute, what does this underscore stuff means? Well, underscore means this is a kind of like a private class. So only, well, this person can kind of like handle it, this file can handle it. Okay. So now what we can do is we need to tell the counter app class that your state will be maintained by underscore app state class. So how do we do this? Well, let's go ahead and do that part. We are going to go over here and override something. We're going to override one function called createState. And if you find createState, it's going to go ahead and call or initialize the counter app state, and it's also going to return you the counter app state, the updated state basically. Now the part for building the widget is going to move, and we're going to move all of this stuff, the widget, the build function, into the counter app state, because that particular class, the underscore counter app state, will have access to the state. So that's why we're moving it over there. So our counter app will kind of looks like this, very lean. But our counter app state, which can maintain the state, will look something like this with the build function. Okay. So now we have all of these different things, and we want to update the counter. Well, we can go ahead and declare a variable, which can be a counter, and we will assign it to 0 value. The underscore means that this is a private variable, and you cannot access it outside, which is fine. The only place we want to access it is inside this underscore counter app state class. If I go ahead and press a button, I can go ahead and say counter ++. But this is not how you will update the counter value, because there are a couple of different things you want to do when you update the counter value. You want to update the counter value, and you also want to render the UI again. Well, why do we want to render the UI again? Well, we want to render the UI again. We want to create the user interface again because we want to display the updated value. So the first thing we should do is we should put the counter right over there. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll use the $sign. This is a string interpolation syntax, and we'll put the counter over there. Okay? And in order to update the counter, we'll see that how we can do that. But first, let's go ahead and do a hard reset. And if I go ahead, so the counter, you can see, is actually getting displayed. This is pretty cool, right? If I go ahead and press the increment, nothing actually happens. I mean, you can go ahead and put a breakpoint over here, or you can print the value. It is updating. It's just not re-rendering the UI. So it might be updating, it might be 3 or 4, but since you update the counter, what you want to do is you want to go again over here and re-render everything so that the updated value gets printed out. But that's not happening. So what you have to do is you will want to call that inside another function called setState. And now we can say counter ++. So setState is a special function, and when you call setState, and inside setState you set a value, so that value that gets updated, and setState will also make sure that your build function is fired again with the new value so that you can display the new value wherever you want to. Let's go ahead and increment it, and now you can see incrementing is working fine. Let's go ahead and perform a hard reset. So this is a button for the hard reset right there. There we go. So it's 0 now. And there we go. We have actually created our counter. And it's going to be same exact counter. I mean, it's going to look same exact if you run it on an iOS. So this is Flutter. And I really like Flutter because it is very, very simple to build applications. You can see everything is a widget. And they have hundreds of widgets for doing different kind of cool stuff. One thing that I do have concern is about how they maintain the state. And obviously state is a very, very important part of Flutter. Without that, you won't really go that far. But if you are coming from a SwiftUI background, then you can see that they do it a little bit more nicer way. This maintaining state by creating a separate class, that looks like too much work. All right. But this is currently the platform. This is currently what they have. I mean, I would definitely be more interested if they do something like this. State. Or if they use kind of like what SwiftUI does. State, int, counter, and 0. I know that I'm now saying that Flutter should become SwiftUI, but I think this is nice. I mean, you have added these attributes, and now state will automatically be maintained, and I don't really have to worry about the different class, or I have to create a underscore counter app state class. But this is the current state of, I mean, this is how it works. And so I really hope that you have now some idea of what Flutter is and how it can accommodate your needs. In the future videos, I will dive into a little bit more about that. Why would you use Flutter instead of using native? And what will be different scenarios where you will use Flutter instead of using native. And obviously, we will go into how to display a list, how to display maps, how to use the camera, and how to perform an asynchronous request, all of those different cool things. So let me know how you like this video, and thank you so much, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. If you like this video and want to support my work, my channel, then the best way would be to become a patron. Simply go to patreon.com/AzamSharp. Patrons are going to get exclusive videos without any advertisements. You are also going to see behind the scene videos, and you're going to get special discounts on my courses, articles, published content. You can become a patron by simply signing up for a silver tier, which is $5 a month, or a gold tier, which is $10 a month. If you're also interested, you can check out my courses on Udemy. I have a lot of different courses on Udemy, including SwiftUI, MVVM design pattern, and mastering RxSwift, and even a course on Flutter. Thank you so much for your continuous support, and I really hope that you enjoy these videos.